shrinking for me is because I take up space. I take up space in the way that I present in general, not just because I'm a fuller woman. I've never lacked confidence, and I've seen people tell me that that's made them intimidated. So imposter syndrome for me looks like me trying to be smaller than I am. When I feel like an imposter, it usually looks like me trying not to have an opinion about something or keeping my opinion to myself just because I'm like, I don't want them to think I talk too much or that I think I know everything, because those are things that people projected on me. But I hate myself every time I do that. So now I'm much more in the habit of like, if you don't like me, that's too bad. I have to say this thing. Because I know that if I don't, the next few minutes when it's over, I'm going to not be able to be happy with myself. So I can no longer shrink to make other people feel secure. Like if my presence makes you feel some kind of way, that's really none of my business.
You're listening to The Creative Impostor, episode number 64. Welcome to The Creative Impostor. I'm Andrea Klunder, your host, and today I'm bringing you a very special conversation with Stacey Herrera of the Sensuality Project. The Sensuality Project is a podcast that I have been listening to because I met Stacy in an online entrepreneurial, awesome, creative, wonderful women community. And it's the kind of podcast that, well, let's just say it brings up a lot of my Midwestern sensibilities and makes me blush from time to time. Also, this episode, as you may guess, does contain some explicit content, both of a sexual nature and also some swear words. So if you have little ears, sensitive ears around you, you may want to stick some earbuds in your ears or hold off on this one until you are alone. But it's not just about sexy stuff, though it is about that. It's also about communication and pleasure and women feeling comfortable and strong and powerful in their own bodies. It's about giving women a safe space to talk about intimacy and relationships and physicality and, well, sensuality. And that is the whole point of Stacey's work, to help particularly women feel present in their own bodies and not shut it down or block it out or dissociate or feel guilty or awkward or compare themselves and wish that your body was something other than what it is. This conversation is so full of juicy details that I don't want to spend too much time talking your ear off. I do encourage you, if you love this interview, to go check out Stacy online and, of course, in the podcast space. All of the links will be in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimpostor.com/064 for episode 64. And, of course, in your favorite listening app. Another thing that is in your app, if you are listening in Apple Podcasts, are reviews, and ratings of this wonderful podcast. And I don't get a ton of reviews, mostly because I don't really ask for them that often, but I just want to give a shout out to Heather. Heather is one of our community members in the Chicago Women's Creative Collective offline and the Creative Impostor Facebook group online. And Heather recently posted a wonderful review that just makes me feel all warm and squishy inside, that calls The Creative Impostor inspiring, 5 stars. This is one of the few podcasts I listen to immediately when it arrives. No matter what I'm working on, Andrea and her guests inspire me to move on to the next step. I'm disappointed that I don't have headphones with me right now because I know there's one waiting for me. Heather, thank you so much for the review. And you know what? I love getting reviews because I gotta tell you, sometimes this podcasting thing really feels like standing in a closet talking to a wall by yourself. And I imagine that I'm talking to someone real. I imagine that you're here listening to me, but I don't really know. And I don't really know what you think of what I'm saying or what I'm sharing unless you tell me. And it's super great if you post it as a review because then other people see it too. And it lends some legitimacy and community feeling to the show as a whole. I've heard from some other podcast producers and some of my clients that though ratings and reviews in Apple Podcasts and iTunes don't really help your show rankings necessarily, they don't necessarily get you more listens or more downloads. And some people are even like, wait, you can rate and review a show? What? I don't even know where that is. But what they do are provide legitimacy and credibility for people who are considering being a guest on your show, especially higher profile guests and people who get asked to do a lot of interviews. Seeing a lot of positive reviews gives them an indication that there really are people listening to your show who care about what you have to say and are paying attention, which is always a great feeling if you are going to spend the time to be a guest on someone's podcast. So how do you do it? Well, if you are listening in the podcasts app on an iPhone, all you have to do is click to the show and look at the episode list for all available episodes. And you just scroll down, and then you'll see the reviews. For some reason, they show the oldest review first rather than the most current or recent review. I don't get that. But you'll see ratings and reviews, 5 out of 5 stars. And then there are 5 stars, empty stars there that you can tap the number of stars you want to rate. And then just underneath that old review from 2 years ago, which is also a really good one, you can see write a review. And you can do it right in there. All right. Are you ready for Stacy? I don't know if you're ready for Stacy. Here's my conversation with Stacey Herrera, starting out with at least I think it's funny, confession. I've been listening to the Sensuality Project, and every time I'm listening to it and my partner walks into the apartment while I'm listening to it, I'm usually like doing something innocent like washing dishes, and he'll walk in and he'll say, "What are you listening to?"
That's funny.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what your show is all about, and also what you do besides your podcast?
So my work is sensuality focused. So I work with women to really help them to reconnect with their personal intimacy, which translates into them being able to have more deeply intimate connections and experiences with others, particularly around creating conscious relationships. And so that can look romantic, but it can also look like, being able to connect deeper in your family and with your friends and that kind of thing. And the Sensuality Project podcast is kind of like an extension of that. It's a conversational podcast. Like I just talk to sister friends and we just go wherever the conversation takes us. And that often includes a lot of talk about sex and subjects that are sometimes considered shameful or taboo. But those are things that I think are normal, like they're normal in my world. And I think that in order for us to really shift the paradigm of what we're seeing right now, we have to normalize sex because it's kind of how we all got here. So it doesn't make sense, that we act like everyone isn't fucking when everyone, it's like the thing, like nobody wants to act like they're doing it, but everybody's doing it.
I never thought about it that way. This is how we all got here. Why are we acting like nobody's doing it?
Right. It's crazy, right?
And I will say that I love listening to your show, but it still makes me blush a lot, even as a, almost 40-year-old woman who definitely has had my share of experiences. But I grew up, in a Christian household, going to church. I grew up 100% believing, probably until sometime my freshman year of college, I gave up this belief, but believing as I went off to college that whole time that I was not going to have sex until I was married. And it wasn't even like something I had to think really hard about or something that was necessarily being pushed on me. It was just like, of course I'm going to wait till I'm married. And that was something that we didn't really talk about.
It's definitely conditioning. I mean, I grew up in the church. I don't even want to say I grew up in a Christian household. I grew up in the church. And I remember like listening to the sermons and, trying to really wanting to align with what I was hearing, but I never felt like I was. I wanted to because, that's what I was being told. And then I had like all these questions. But also, like, I was very sexual, like, even before I started having sex, I was very aware of my sexuality very young. So it was like trying to reconcile what I was feeling with what I was hearing and trying to fit into this box. And it just didn't really work out for me.
So then how do you differentiate? Because I think sometimes we use these words and these concepts of sensuality and sexuality very interchangeably, and they're not really the same thing.
No, they're not. For me, sensuality is using the tools that your body came with to allow you to experience the world. So all 5 senses, plus intuition. Intuition is kind of like a culmination of all the senses when you think about it. It's being able to communicate, relay to your brain what your body is experiencing through sight, sound, taste, touch. So like all of those things collectively for me are sensual experiences, because life is a sensual experience. And when you're actually tuned into it on purpose, it gives life this extra texture. Like it allows you to stay in the room. When you're using your senses, it's very difficult to time travel out of the space that you're in. Whereas when you're not, it's very easy. Like we could be having this conversation and I could be thinking about something else. So I'm not really here. And we do it all the time sexually. We time travel out, like sometimes even just in the name of orgasm, we start thinking of a fantasy. Well, the minute you start doing that, you left the room. Like you left the room, you're not in it anymore. But if you can stay in your body using your senses and, sending your attention to where you're feeling sensation or reminding yourself to breathe, because it's very difficult to time travel when you're breathing on purpose. Those are sensual experiences. So sex can have a sensual element, but it is not required. You can have sex and not have a single sensual experience, whereas sensuality does not require you to have sex.
Where do you think sensuality comes into play for the creative person? Since I come from like a yoga and meditation background, we're always talking about be present, be fully present with your work, tune into your intuition.
I think that sensuality is probably like the missing link for a lot of creatives. Like let's use writing, for example. If you're a writer, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, your job is to give enough texture to your story or your article or whatever, enough texture so that whoever is reading it can feel the experience without being there. You cannot do that if you cannot relay sensuality in your writing. So if I'm describing an ice cream, I could just be like, she licked an ice cream cone. Well, that doesn't say anything. You know what I mean? But if I say like, she slowly, bobbed her tongue up the side of the creamy, cold, frothy ice cream, gives you a different experience because you can imagine cold, you can imagine frothy, you know what cream is like. So it invites you into being able to imagine the experience. So as a creative, if that's what you're writing, no one wants to read a flat piece of work. They want it to have some dimension to it. And sensuality can do that. Same thing if you're an artist. If you paint, artists that work with textures in canvas, it's the texture that creates a different experience. So even oil paint on canvas is a different experience than oil paint on paper because the canvas actually gives it texture, whether you're using a carving knife or not. Like you don't even have to. There's a level of texture and dimension that comes the same way with using variations of the same color. Black is one thing, but the minute you add a little white to it or a little sparkle to it, it changes the entire dimension of that one color. So it goes from being flat to being like multi-layered, even though all you did was add another element. So as a creative, no matter what your medium is, using your own senses will enhance whatever you're creating. It's hard for me to imagine a creative not using sensuality. I think the only difference is most of us don't use it on purpose.
Say more about that.
Well, doing something intentionally is very different than just doing something. We breathe all the time. You don't even have to tell your body to breathe. In yoga, it's kind of the same thing. It's not like you're never breathing. Obviously you are, or you'd be dead, right? So breathing happens. It's a very automatic response. But when you breathe on purpose, your body has a very different experience. So doing anything with intention or doing it on purpose and not just having it be this automatic thing changes the way you perceive everything. We're smelling things all the time. You see stuff, obviously, you're walking around, you see flowers. It doesn't mean you stop to smell them, right? Like, it doesn't mean you even notice the color. If you pass the same rose bush outside of your house every single day, you may never notice it. But the moment you look at it on purpose, you might recognize, like, the fragrance will come alive to you because you may walk by it every day and never smell it until you actually stop to look at it. And then it completely changes the experience. And from that point on, you might never ignore that bush again. So just bringing your attention to something changes everything about your experience. And it adds expansiveness to your whole life. So for me, everything is sensual. Like before we started recording, I made a cup of coffee. And I had been craving coffee. And I don't drink coffee very often, maybe once a week. But today I was like, I really want a cup of coffee. So right before, like, I made the coffee and I added some butter to it and blended it in the blender. And so it was nice and frothy. and I used like this French butter, so which is very different than regular American butter, right? So I could smell the cream in the butter, and I added like a sprinkle of cinnamon. And like when it touched my tongue, I was like, oh my God, this is so good. Because I was in the room for it. Was, I make coffee all the time. But, it was the aroma, and then it was the frothiness from the cream. And then as it got in my mouth and like headed toward the back of my throat, I could taste the cinnamon. And I didn't add very much sugar, but there was like this hint of sweetness. So I was like, this is so good. But I didn't just like walk away and chug the coffee. Before I even came like upstairs to sit down, I stopped to enjoy the first sip first because I wanted to be fully present for the experience. Then I moved forward. But it's like, you look at it, it might look like just a cup of coffee, but that's not what it felt like to me. I was like, this is like the best cup of coffee I've ever had. Now, I will say, I probably say that every time I drink something, because I am honest that in that moment, it is the best thing I've ever tasted because I'm fully present for it.
And I think in our world, often we're rushing around and we're busy and we're trying to multitask and do 5 million things. We feel like there's always work that needs to be done. We're constantly feeling behind. I don't know. I often am feeling that way. And even with my yoga and meditation training, it's like sometimes I forget to pay attention to those things where I'm like, oh, I have 5 minutes and I need to eat something. And then I have to go do this thing. And then I have this and then I have this. So I think it's easy to forget to enjoy those experiences. Or, I can easily think of a million times when I've inhaled my food and then I haven't really even tasted it.
I'm guilty sometimes. But, like, I try to at least have a couple of times a week have an on-purpose distraction-free meal. At least twice a week where my phone's off and I'm not watching television. I'm not like listening to anything. It's just me and the food. And I get to experience the texture and the flavor and the aroma and not like rush to inhale it. Cause sometimes I'm like, did I fucking chew? Like, I know, like, did I even chew that? You know what I mean? Cause it is easy to get caught up in that. But it's almost like anything, any habit, is we have to get conscious about creating opportunity for sensual experiences. And then it becomes a habit. Like, I can't pass a rose bush. Like, I cannot. It is difficult for me to do that. I can become very annoying to people around me, though, because I recognize when I see something new or I smell a scent that I didn't smell before. It's like, wait a minute, what is that? I could be walking and I'll stop mid-step and I'll be like, do you smell that? Because then I need to find the source of whatever that thing is. So it becomes habitual. But I feel like I am so much more in my body. Like, I've never been more of myself than I am right now because I'm so aware. And my number one job every single day, no matter what I'm doing, is to stay in the room. So it doesn't matter if I'm recording a podcast or if I'm making some eggs or walking to the mailbox or having sex. My job is to stay in the room because the most important thing or person is the thing or person that's right in front of me in any given moment. Like, nothing else exists. Like, if I'm on my phone texting and I'm not saying I'm never guilty, like, I'm not saying I'm never guilty, but I have to remind myself, like, I won't even take a phone call. If I can't give you my undivided attention, I won't even answer your call. So that's annoying to some people because it might be like, oh, well, Stacy, I called you 2 days ago. I know I'm calling you back right now because I won't answer the phone or make a phone call unless I can sit down and give you my full attention. So if I'm multitasking, I'm not giving you my full attention, and that's a waste of your time and that's a waste of my time. You deserve me to be fully present because if you called me, that means that you wanted something. So you deserve for me to be able to give you my full attention. And if I can't, then I would rather wait to connect with you than to call you back while I'm in the line at the grocery store.
My meditation teacher, she refers to this as deep time, where you are focused on, like you said, the person who's in front of you or the task that's immediately at hand, where you're not distracted by 5 things. God, it drives me crazy. You're having dinner with somebody and they're like checking their phone notifications and texting on their phone and, hang on, I just need to do this thing. And I have done it. I have done it to friends. We're out for coffee and I'm like, oh, I just need to respond to this thing real quick. And it's something that I've seen slowly creep into my behaviors. When I first got texting, I used to never text anyone. I was like, texting is so dumb. Why would anyone text? Like, just call. Texting is annoying. It's like these behaviors that just totally obliterate this idea of deep time, where it's like we actually have to make a focused, concentrated effort to have a distraction-free conversation with somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm good about it most of the time. But let me tell you, the people that suffer the most are the people I love the best. The people that I am out of integrity in the way that I sometimes offer my presence to them are the people closest to me, like my daughter or my sister. I am not always in integrity because I take advantage of them. So I have to be mindful, even if it's just like if I'm busy doing something and one of them comes home from work or whatever, and they enter the room to talk to me, I intentionally turn around and look at them and hear about their day. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes if we're riding in the car together and we're talking, I won't be trying to multitask and send a text. So I'm bad about it because I'm so familiar with them. I take them for granted. Look, they'll listen to this and be like, So I need to get better with those people, the people closest to me. I'm much better at it with other people.
Interesting.
Yeah, familiarity can be the devil because it's so easy to take for granted the people that that if there's any sense that of they'll always be there, even if it's unconscious, it's much easier to take those people for granted. So one of the ways that I do a check, though, is I ask them a couple of times a year to rate me. How am I doing? What do you need from me? Is there anything that you want me to stop doing or start doing, or what do you need more of? Because I want to make sure these are people that are in optional relationships with me. Every relationship is optional, but, they're in optional relationships with me. So I want them to want to be in it. So I also give them an opportunity to give me feedback, like, how am I doing? Because, we go into relationships and just think like once you go in it, then after that, they don't require any maintenance. And we sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we'll pay more attention in our romantic connections. We might, be more willing to adapt and adjust for a romantic partner, but we don't always do that in our friendships or with our family or, with our kids or whatever. But all relationships are optional, not just the ones where you're fucking,
It's true. I mean, sometimes we think of our family relationships as just being like something that is not optional, something that was thrust upon us or that we were thrust into for better or for worse. And we think, oh, that person has to be there because they're my family. But then you're absolutely right. Like the degree to which we engage with each other is optional and it does vary.
And anybody can say, you know what? I kind of don't want to be in a relationship with you anymore. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, like we don't always recognize that not only do I have the right to choose whether or not to be bothered with you, you have the right to choose whether or not to be bothered with me. And if I'm not checking in, then I cheat myself out of growing and I cheat them out of growing too. And I want to be the very best version of myself as much as I possibly can. And at the end of my life, as important as my work is, and as much as I love living, like I love all the things that come with living, but at the end of my life, I'm going to care the most about the relationships I had. So shouldn't I give a fuck now? I need to act like it's important right now, not, when I'm in the process of dying. Now I want to have all these regrets. Oh, I wish that I had spent more time talking to you, or I wish that I had spent more time, we had created more memories or had more experiences. That's too little too late. Like right now, I want to make sure that we're maximizing the experience because, by my calculations, and this is just a wishful thought, but I probably got about 35 years left because I don't really desire to live past 80. That's enough. I'm going to be 45 this year. That's enough time. So I have about 35 years left. These first 45 years have gone so fucking fast. And now that I know that there are more years behind me than ahead of me, it's going to seemingly go faster. And as a result of that, I don't want to have regrets. So I want to make sure that not only am I having the relationship and life experiences that I desire, but also that I'm also providing the kinds of relationships and experiences that make other people have more enriched lives also.
So let's talk a little bit about your work. What exactly do you do with your clients?
There's a lot of sex talk. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of sex talk, a lot of talk about, being present and in your body. Because as women, and I particularly work with women or people that identify as women, we are very good at checking out and numbing out because we carry so many things for so many people and the way all these different hats that we wear in our lives. So it's very easy for us to numb out and to check out, and we're physically present but absent otherwise. And so a lot of my work is around inviting women to be present in their bodies. Like this body is like the only home you'll have. Like you can rent an apartment or buy a house or be a nomad, but you only get one house for the duration of this lifetime and you're in it. It's everywhere you go. So by using the tools that come with the house, you get to have a more, 4-dimensional experience. And that means that life itself is more pleasurable. So my work is about pleasure, like on purpose pleasure, being intentional and making pleasure important. But that also, extends to being more intimate. It's hard to have a profoundly deep relationship with yourself or anyone if there is no intimacy. You can have a conversation with someone, but if you're not allowed to be vulnerable and you never feel like you can be naked, then it kind of is just like a flat experience. So we do a lot of talking. There's a lot of exercise. There's a lot of crying. Yeah, there's a lot of crying in my work because there's a lot of trauma, emotional trauma that we don't always identify that gets in the way of our sensual experience. We don't come here checked out. We learn how to check out. We learn by the people we witness in our first environments, but then we also learn to check out by being told who we aren't or who we are, or in numbing out and dumbing down our own experience or shrieking or feeling like we have to pretend and project. And all of those things create a disconnect in the way that we experience ourselves. And that leads to stuff like feeling like you don't like the body that you live in. Like I had someone tell me the other day, I don't even want to look at myself naked. And it was like, oh my God, can you imagine being in a house that you can't stand? Every day, like waking up and hating the house that you live in and you can't move out. You can move out of an apartment. Like you can't move out of this, not in this lifetime. Like you can't move out of this house as long as you're alive, right? So like hating it that much. The only reason for not liking the body you came in is if you're comparing it to someone else's. And we get in the habit of doing that because the media has told us what this hypothetical perfect shape is and the perfect hair and, the perfect proportions. And if you don't look like this thing, which is unrealistic, then something's wrong with you. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people live from the space of, I don't look like that, or, I want a Beyonce booty, well, guess what? I don't have a Beyonce booty and I'm never going to have a Beyonce booty, nor did I ever have one, and I like the booty that came with this body. But all of this messaging, and that this body doesn't belong to you. You're allowed to be sexy, but not sexual. Like there's so much messaging that causes us to disconnect from ourselves. So my work is around helping women to inhabit the space that they're in. And sometimes that looks like them wanting to make changes. But before we even go there, like, can we just be in a space of acceptance? It doesn't mean you have to say, like, I kind of want to lose 5 pounds. That's okay. But can you accept that those 5 pounds live with you today? So there's a lot of self-pleasure work. So sometimes masturbation, rather than it being about pleasure, sometimes it's a healing concept. Because sex is just as healing as it is pleasurable. And sometimes it's about having distraction-free meals. It's about helping women to get in the habit of staying in the room.
I would say that growing up, I never really felt comfortable with my body. And I don't think I actually started to feel appreciative of my body until I started really seriously getting into a yoga practice. And in the beginning of doing a yoga practice, I was very not flexible. I didn't feel strong. But the more I got into it, I started to realize how strong my body could be. And I started to see, if I take care of my body, how much better it feels. And, forget about if it looks different or if my clothes fit me differently, which after a while they did, even though that wasn't my goal. My goal was just, when I treat my body in this way, I feel better. And then I started to see, I'm actually pretty strong. My body actually can do this. And I started to appreciate my body more from an internal place than from I appreciate the way my body looks external place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That makes all the difference. It's funny because I don't have skinny memories at all. None. Like, I was almost 10 pounds at birth and it just never stopped. So while now, I'll see someone from high school and they might say wow, you look the same. And I'm like, yep, I'm the same size fat as I was, over 20 years ago. Because I've never gone too much in either direction. Uh-huh. So, and I'm grateful. I'm really grateful because now that I'm in my 40s and I hear so many women, talk about the them that they used to be, if only I knew how beautiful I was when I was 25, or I didn't even know I wasn't overweight back then. And now look at me, I don't have those memories. Thank goodness that so I don't have a former me to compare myself to. But I never disliked my body, even though I had a mom and an older sister who were built like a brick house, big tits, big ass, small waist. So I did not look like that. And so I saw how the world responded to them. And I did not get that kind of reaction, but I didn't come here with negative self-talk. I do not know why. I just didn't never have that. I didn't even know that was a thing until I was in my 20s and I went to a Weight Watcher meeting and I heard the women talking about hating what they saw in the mirror. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? I didn't know that people did that because I had never had that kind of internal dialogue. So I didn't come here to learn that. But the messaging that I got from other people about my body led me to believe that there must have been something wrong with it. But I could not rectify what they were saying with what I felt on the inside because they didn't match. So, when people would say to me, you would be you've got a cute face, or you would be so cute if you were smaller, and I couldn't understand. I heard it, but I never had looked in the mirror and thought, I'm so disgusting and I'm so fat. That has never happened to me. Now, I'm not saying that I don't see the fleshiness. I do see it. There's no dysmorphia happening. I see it, but I've never found it unattractive. So by the time I was a teenager, I had sex for the first time at 16. And I remember not wanting to take my shirt off, not because I thought something was wrong with my body, but I thought that he would think something was wrong with it because that was the messaging. So it didn't even belong to me. Now, consequently, because I don't have negative self-talk as a fuller woman, and I'm talking, I haven't been under 200 pounds since middle school. But as a fuller woman, I have never been in a relationship with anyone that thought my body was disgusting. Whereas I see how the negative self-talk can invite the kind of people that would confirm what you're saying in your head. Because I don't have that, what I have invited, all of my partners have all thought that my body was the most beautiful thing ever. Where it's just oh my God, I love the way you feel, or I love the way you look. That's always been the messaging, but that had so much to do with how I perceived myself. Because you can always find proof of whatever experience you're having. Always. There's always evidence to confirm what you're saying.
Do you think that we invite intimate relationships and partners without even realizing that we're doing it based on the type of emotional or psychological headspace that we're in?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, I didn't have that particular thing. I'm not shit free, though. I had other shit, right? So my thing was like, what was familiar to me was emotional disconnection. Like my parents have a very avoidant attachment style. That's what I knew. And so I am really great about attracting people that can ignore me just right. Now, my parents aren't mean people, so I've never attracted anyone that was mean to me or would say mean things to me. Again, and I also wasn't saying mean things to me. But I can smell somebody who is an emotional avoidant from a mile away. Like I can smell them and fall in love fast. Like, oh my God, because that's so familiar to me. So I attract that because I know it. But I know it now to recognize it. So now as soon as I see that, I recognize, I'm like, I did not attract you from a place of wholeness, because when I attract someone from a place of wholeness, they're fucking available. So we attract what we are to a certain extent. And sometimes what we are is remnants from our parental experience, So it might not necessarily be a behavior characteristic that you necessarily do, but it is a characteristic that and we're always trying to recreate the experience of what is familiar, because familiar is safe. Familiar is not necessarily healthy, though.
Let's talk a little bit woo-woo for a second. So I know you're into chakras, and this is going to get into the imposter syndrome stuff a little bit too, but I spend a lot of time thinking about second chakra issues, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the relationship between sex, money, and creativity.
Are they different? Are they different? I don't think so.
How do you see the three of those intertwined as part of the same whole?
Well, for one thing, let's take sex and money first. How we do money is how we do sex and vice versa. If you're really generous with your money, guess what? You are generous with your pussy. It doesn't mean you sleep around. It means that you're not putting restrictions on that, because the same way that if you were going out with someone, you would treat them because you could, you would do the same thing sexually. And if you happen to be super conservative and you're penny pinching with your money, you probably are pretty stingy with sex also. Sex and intimacy, sexual and physical intimacy. So they usually go very much hand in hand, because we usually do them the same way. The same way we often feel a little bit shy or bashful, or we feel like sex is not a conversation that should be had in the open, whether we're talking about our own personal experiences or not. If we feel like we should talk about sex in hushed tones, we should whisper about it. We probably do the same thing about money. We don't want to talk about like how much we have or how much we need. We get really tight-lipped about it. So we usually maneuver those two spaces exactly the same way. And, money is energetic. We quantify it physically with dollars, like paper dollars and metal coins, but it's technically a barter and energetic exchange. And creativity is born of the same energy that sex is. Sex ultimately is a physical act that serves the purpose of the ultimate creation, creating life, right? But it's the same kind of energy. So it doesn't matter if you are creating a baby, or if you're writing a poem, or, if you are braiding some hair, because that's a creative act also. It's different amounts of the same type of energy. The same way you can cultivate sexual energy by yourself. You don't necessarily have to have a partner. Of course, that means that you're not going to create a baby. Not yet. Anyways, our evolution hasn't gotten to that place yet. But you can create something, you can create the experience and the energy and have it to radiate out. But I think in Western culture, we don't talk about energy as a thing. We identify energy as electricity. Energy is something that the Department of Water and Power takes care of. that's the only languaging we have around energy, except for, you see it all the time, but because no one talks about it, like, when you look at a fire, you can see the energy of the heat radiating off of the fire. It's like an aura of the flame, right? But we have that same thing happening in our bodies all the time. We just don't recognize it. And because no one tells us, we have a tendency to disconnect from what is actually true. Mm-hmm. But sex, money, and creativity, they're the same. They come from the same space. And in women, in the female body, when I say that, I mean gendered female, only because the energy systems look different based on what type of body you are in. So, whereas sexual energy is strongly in the sacral chakra for women, because that's where our reproductive organs live. Mm-hmm. However, the entrance of the vagina is in the root chakra, just as the penis and the testes are in the root. And that's one of the reasons that for a man, his sexuality is strongly tied to his root, how he perceives his money situation and his home life. Like money for him is a basic security need, whereas for women, it's a different place for us because our reproductive organs are one chakra up. So we identify with money differently. Like we need to feel foundational. Like we need to have a strong home life. We need to feel like we are rooted in our physical space, but our money doesn't necessarily have to be tied to that. That's the reason that we do better being taken care of in that way. Whereas, men sometimes struggle with that. They feel like they have to be the earners because their sexuality is mostly in their root chakra and not their sacral chakra. That's one of the reasons we function so differently. Now, consider this, like the parts of women that, and again, I'm going to say gender identified because I'm not necessarily meaning, how you identify, because that can be different. Yeah. But for physically gendered women, I guess I should say like cis women, the parts of us that protrude are often the parts of us that relate to us emotionally. There's a reason that our breasts bulge and men typically don't have bulging breasts. But where do the breasts sit? In the heart chakra. And so, yes, we are more emotional. That energy field is bigger for us than for men. It's a reason that their chests are pretty flat. Now, keep in mind, the reason that men have nipples in utero, once the body decides which gender, it's going to be, the body has already developed these nipples before it decides whether it's going to be identified physically as a boy. And once that happens, the body could say, you know what, I'm a boy and I'm not going to grow breasts, so I'm going to absorb these nipples back. But that would take too much time. So the body develops the nipples first, and then, I'm going to be a boy, so I am not going to produce breast tissue. And so the chest stays flat, but the nipples are still there. And they're still responsive. They have sensation. They create arousal just like women, but you're not going to get any milk from them. And you're probably going to have a lot less emotion in the way that you move through the world because that energy center is smaller on men. These are all just my own things, though. You don't have to believe it.
And so speaking of the energy of creativity and money and sex, I've been thinking about this idea of feeling like a fake in terms of our sexual relationships and how that shows up in other parts of our life. And I think about that a lot because when I was struggling through the first iteration of my business, when I owned a yoga studio and I was having the worst financial experience of my life and also was feeling really stuck creatively because here I was doing this, like for me, ultimate creative thing of creating this business from scratch and doing this thing that I love and putting it out there in the world. But it just the flow wasn't right. It was like me giving until I had nothing left and it wasn't being reciprocated and coming back to me. That was also a time when that exact pattern was being mirrored in my intimate life as well, where I was like putting it out there and giving and doing the online dating thing and making the effort and like pushing and trying to make stuff work that obviously was not going to work. And I was attracting all the partners who are all taking, and not really giving a whole lot back in terms of anything outside of the surface level physical. Like, they were great at giving the surface level physical, but not a drop deeper than that. In retrospect, it's easier to see how what was happening in my intimate life was mirroring what was happening in my creative and business and financial life. And also was a time when I was feeling really insecure about all those things, and also a little bit reckless with like not being grounded in my identity in any of those scenarios. Like, I didn't feel fully myself in my work. I didn't feel fully myself in those intimate relationships. It was almost like observing myself doing these behaviors and making these choices and being like, who is that? That's not me. I don't do that. I don't have these kinds of relationships. I don't do that kind of behavior. And there was like this disconnect between who I authentically felt like I was and then what I was actually observing myself doing.
Well, I think that the biggest way it shows up is self-consciousness. Because when you're being self-conscious, you're not being authentic. The moment, in terms of like being sexually intimate with someone, the moment you start thinking, what is he or she thinking about me? You just cut the intimacy cord. You cannot be intimate and self-conscious at the same time. And the same thing is true when you're in business. If you are constantly thinking, what are they going to think about my offering? Or what are they thinking about my sales page? Or what are they going to think on this, one-on-one call? The moment you start thinking that, you just cut off your authenticity. You cannot show up as the truest, most sincere version of yourself. Because you start making the other person's thoughts about the experience of you start making it your responsibility, and you're essentially trying to manage someone else's experience, and you cannot. It takes you out of the room. It completely takes you out of the room. And, I think often feeling like a fraud or feeling like an imposter is usually closely related to shrinking. You're shrinking whenever you're doing that. Whether you're projecting big, because it doesn't necessarily mean you're projecting small. You could be projecting arrogance disguised as confidence, right? But the reason that people perceive it as arrogance is because you are really feeling insecure and you're shrinking. But you project big because it's kind of like, when you make those little hand shadow puppets, your hand's so small, but it projects this really big thing, right?
Yeah.
But it isn't true. It isn't true. It's like the Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Like, he's this small little person trying to project this really big image, and you feel like a fraud because you are. And sometimes shrinking for me is about, because I take up space. I take up space in the way that I present in general, not just because I'm a fuller woman, which I think is in direct proportion to the size of my personality, by the way. But I take up a lot of space, and I've never lacked confidence. And I've seen people tell me that that's made them intimidated. So imposter syndrome for me looks like me trying to be smaller than I am rather than bigger. I don't have to project bigger because that's just how it is. When I feel like an imposter, it usually looks like me trying not to have an opinion about something or keeping my opinion to myself, when just because I'm like, I don't want them to think I talk too much or that I think I know everything, because those are things that people projected on me. But I hate myself every time I do that. So now I'm much more in the habit of like, fuck it. If you don't like me, that's too bad. I have to say this thing. Like if it's something that I feel like I can't not say something, because I know that if I don't, the next few minutes when it's over, I'm going to not be able to be happy with myself. So I can no longer shrink to make other people feel secure. Like, if my presence makes you feel some kind of way, that's really none of my business. My job is to be very intentional with my words and be very intentional with my intention. How you perceive that is not my business. So it's the self-consciousness, though. Because even when I'm shrinking, I'm being self-conscious. Like, if I'm holding my tongue, it's because I'm worried about what you're going to think about what my tongue might say.
Yeah.
So it's always about self-consciousness. And self-consciousness is the assassin of intimacy, whether it's any kind of intimacy. So sexually speaking, if you're going to be thinking about what the other person is thinking about you at all, intimacy has now become impossible. It cannot exist. And it doesn't matter if you've been in a relationship for 20 years. If you're worried about what the other person is thinking, intimacy can't happen. It just can't. You have to be able to be vulnerable.
So what's your best advice for somebody who is listening to this and saying, oh, yep, I see that. I see where I'm being self-conscious, whether that's in my intimate relationships or in my creative work or in my business or in my personal life, or I see where I haven't really been taking the time to connect with my sensuality and they're needing that little nudge back into the room, back into the present moment.
I would say practice receiving. I had 2017 was shitty for me. It was really, really shitty. And half of it was okay. And then everything shifted in my business and my money got really funny and I wasn't laughing, not funny, haha, right? It wasn't, it got very short, very quickly. And so rather than pouring my attention into trying to figure out a way to create more money, or create a new offering or to reinvent the wheel. Rather than doing that, I decided that I was going to really focus on receiving and allowing myself to receive and getting very comfortable because I'm a giver. And so receiving has never been my strong suit. It's never been my strong suit. So I decided to practice doing that because if I can't receive in the physical realm, because that's where we're existing in this time and space. If I can't receive in the physical realm, can I receive from the universe? No. I'm not going to be able to receive the intangible if I can't receive the physical because my mind identifies with this physical world. That's what I'm doing here. Mm-hmm. So if I can't receive a compliment from you, or if I can't receive when you offer to take me to dinner, if I can't receive, you just telling me you did a great job or whatever, if I can't get comfortable with that, then how am I going to receive a client who's like, here, Stacy, I want to pay you $5,000 to work with you. What? You know what I mean? If I can't receive you buying me a 50-cent cup of coffee, I can't receive $5,000 in the form of a payment. So practicing receiving is so vital. It seems like such an abstract idea, right? Mm-hmm. But the universe is designed in contrast. Light and dark is an illusion. It's not really real. But there's a reason that every morning we are gifted with sunlight. And it's not that the sun disappears ever. It never goes away. But every night we think it does. We believe it does. We think that it disappears behind the horizon line. All the time, every single day, we've watched that happen. So there's a reason that it exists. And it's the same thing with giving and receiving. There's a reason that you have to be able to be a good receiver in order to be a good giver. You can't be a good giver without being a good receiver. And so receiving really does invite you into the present. Giving is very sensual also. But there's a different experience in receiving. I'm going to get really graphic for a moment. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so...
You're going to make me blush, Stacy.
So, men are, and again, physically gendered men. Well, even if you have transformed into a physically gendered man, the male body is designed to give. The penis is designed to give. And the female body is designed to receive. So men sometimes have a hard time receiving. So I once had a partner and he was very generous with his sex and generous with his money too. Very generous. And he wasn't comfortable receiving. And this one time I said, I just want you to receive. And he said, okay. But in his mind, he thought, I'm just going to receive for a little while and then I'm going to give because that's what I do. So, I'm giving him a blowjob. Like I told you, I was going to get graphic fast. So I'm giving him a blowjob. And of course, he's trying not to surrender because he doesn't want to ejaculate, because if he ejaculates, that means that he cannot give. He struggled. I had to keep, every time I felt him, tense up, or hold his breath, because men often do that. Like when they're trying to hold back, they immediately go, but sometimes that causes the erection to wane, right? Particularly if they're older, they think they're having erectile dysfunction, which a lot of the time they're just holding their fucking breath all the time. So I'm like, every time I felt him do that, I would say, you're not breathing. And he would say, just please let me. And I said, no. He's like, I really want I want to please you too. And I'm like, no, I'm getting pleasure. But right now, your only job is to receive. And we went back and forth because he could not. It took him probably 15 minutes to finally give up and to recognize that I wasn't going to let him not receive. And years later, he's like, that qualifies as one of the best sexual experiences of my life, because he had never been forced to receive. And now, like, after that, like, sex for him, he says, is more pleasurable because now he can receive. And so, as a woman, we do that also. Even though our bodies are designed to receive, we sometimes think that we have to give. And that's the reason we fake orgasms. Because if you happen to have a male partner, we think that they need the validation of our orgasm. And so we pretend, instead of just relaxing and allowing our body to do what it does. If we allow an orgasm, it will come. But we think that we have to give something. So we think our orgasm is a gift that we give instead of an experience we allow and receive. I mean, it's a game changer for your whole life to get really good at receiving. But, we've been conditioned. It's better to give than to receive. We think that it's bad. You're a gold digger if you want to receive, no. So many stories. And so then we don't. But then we wonder, how come we can't have successful businesses? Like, I promise you that almost every person that's having a sucky business experience, now it doesn't necessarily mean that maybe you're not generating the kind of money that you want. It doesn't mean that you're going to be a millionaire because you're a great receiver. You might be, but every person that has a business that's struggling or drowning, I promise you that they're a poor receiver, and that they will be able to find areas in their life where they keep returning gifts. If someone compliments you and you say, these shoes are old, you just gave the gift back. You would never someone hands you a gift, you would never be like, I do not want that shit. But every time you turn, that's what you're saying. So if you're struggling, and again, I know the story well because I have lived it. So if your business is struggling, pay attention to your receiving habits. Are you able to receive? Are you able to accept kindness? When someone tells you how great you are, first of all, and let me just add that modesty is bullshit. Modesty is bullshit. Like, stop fucking pretending you're not awesome when you are. I'm not with that modesty. When someone tells me, you're great, yep, you're right. Like, why should I pretend I'm not great? Or someone tells you you're intelligent. Should I pretend that? No. Yes, I am. I'm not doing myself a favor by not accepting the truth of that. Like, you don't have to dumb it down. That doesn't mean, like, you can be humble, but fuck modesty. I think the word should be removed from the dictionary.
Yes. I mean, that's so true. It's always been hard to receive compliments for me. Definitely. It's really funny. Just today, I had my high school podcasting students, and the organization that I work with, or that I work through, gave us these little tiny cards, and one set of them says awesome and one set says amazing. And the awesome card is their opportunity for them to say something that is great about themselves. And then the amazing card is their opportunity to say something that they appreciate about someone else. And my students, not surprisingly, they had an easier time giving the compliments to other people than saying something about themselves. And here I am, like, implementing this exercise, right? And I'm thinking, like, oh, it's really sad that a lot of them don't want to say something great about themselves. And then one of my students wanted to say their amazing card about me. And I suddenly got really uncomfortable and, like, awkward and weird that one of my students wanted to say how amazing they thought I was. And it's like, I'm the one bringing the exercise to them, and I can't even take a compliment about myself. So I had to just sit there and I was like, just hear what your student is saying, Because you don't always get those compliments every day. And this is your opportunity to really soak in how good it feels to hear that they actually appreciate what you're doing. But man, I was surprised by my own reaction.
No, well, I'll give you a really great way to get over that fast. So if you hit your knee and you said, wow, that hurt. And if I said, no, it didn't, Andrea, what would you say?
I'd be like, you're crazy.
Right? Because like, I can't tell you your experience, can I?
No.
Like, I didn't hit my knee, you did. And you say, oh my God, that really hurt. No, it didn't.
Yeah.
No, it didn't. But you would say you're crazy because you don't get to tell me how I feel, right?
Right.
So that means you don't get to tell somebody how they feel about you either.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If someone says that their experience of you is awesome, you don't get to tell them that's not how they feel. It doesn't mean that you won't ever feel like that tightening in your solar plexus, right? It doesn't mean you won't ever feel it. It means that it'll pass quickly, and until eventually it happens so fast that you don't recognize it. It doesn't mean that you won't blush a little bit, because it's kind of like having the spotlight turned on you all of a sudden, so you will feel a little bit of, oh, I didn't expect that, but at the same time, it's like, is it true? And the is it true part isn't for you. It's true for them. You know what I'm saying? So you don't get to say like, that's not true.
Yeah.
Oh, you're saying I'm awesome. That's not true. Well, I'm sorry, Andrea. That was my experience. You get to not think you're awesome if you want to, but I think you're awesome. So, but that's because we're always trying to manage someone else's experience. But we don't get to do that. You don't get to tell someone else how they feel. And if someone else thinks that you're awesome, accept that shit. Yep. Like I'm unapologetic. I am unapologetic. Now there are certain things that still give me a little, like it's much easier for me to accept when someone tells me, I said something that made them feel some kind of way, for example, as opposed to like, if my lover says to me, honey, you're so amazing. And that is like, really? So I had to practice, because for years, if someone told me they loved me, like romantically, as soon as they said it, you know what I would say? Why do you love me? Why do you love me? Tell me what experience, because it's like I needed to tally up proof. Like you have to have a list of, you have to show me evidence of why you could possibly feel like that. And it took me a while to realize that it was because I could not receive that. So now, when someone says it to me, sometimes if I feel myself blushing, then sometimes the only thing I can muster is I receive. Thank you. I received that, rather than, why do you feel like that? Tell me this the way that you love me. Now, the only time that I will offer something else is if someone says, you said this thing and it changed me or it taught me, then I will remind them, I can never teach you anything. All I can do is help you remember. I'm only an expert in one experience, my own. If you happen to resonate with my experience, that means that it existed inside of you already. So I will not take credit for someone else's enlightenment or their transformation. That's the only, and then that's not me rejecting a compliment. That's me helping them to receive their own greatness. But don't return the compliments anymore. Don't give them back. Just receive them. And the better you get at that, because it's really about keeping your heart open, because when someone gives you a compliment and you immediately want to shrink, there's a contraction that's happening in your heart space. So one practice that you can use sensually to help keep your heart open is, when you're in the shower, a lot of times we turn the water down to close our pores. That's why we do it, right? But when we do that, we immediately start to clench. You get cold, you want to shiver, and you pull everything in tight. But instead of doing that, turn the water down and breathe without allowing yourself to clench a single muscle on your body, no matter how cold it gets. Ooh. That means don't squeeze your ass cheeks or nothing. Like don't squeeze anything. Just let your heart be open and breathe through it, because it's a practice in keeping your heart open. Because when our heart starts to shut, it tightens everything. It doesn't just tighten that one space. We start to tighten everything. But if we can get in the habit of keeping our heart open, So that means that even when someone gives you a compliment and there might be a little bit of discomfort, your instinct won't be to close your heart down. You can still be open to receiving.
That's beautiful. Stacey, I do have one last question for you before we part ways.
Okay.
This is my trick question, which is...
Look, I'm ready.
Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners today that you haven't said yet or that I didn't get a chance to ask?
Great question. That is a trick question. I would say that if no one hears anything else, if no one hears anything else that I've said, if the only thing you take away is stay in the room, like cultivating a life that is around being present. And being present doesn't mean never thinking of the past or visualizing the future, because if you're doing it in the moment, you're in the present. But if staying in the room is about allowing yourself to be with whatever is currently happening and to be there in your body and not to disconnect from yourself. So staying in the room is the most important habit we can cultivate in this lifetime. You know, there's nothing worse than having an experience and looking back on it later and not remembering the experience because you weren't there. You know, and that's happening so much more often because now we're so busy trying to capture the moment than live the moment. You know, like every time we whip out our cell phones to try to take a picture of something, and then the only memory you have is your Instagram post. Yeah. You know, so if nothing else, stay in the room. Stay in the room as often as possible. And rather than trying to collect moments on film, collect moments in your heart space instead. And you can do that by staying in the room. Be where you are with whoever's right in front of you. Make eye contact as much as possible. Use the pads of your fingers to feel the texture of everything. You know, taste with your eyes closed because it enhances flavor. You know, listen not just with your ears, but with your heart so that you can hear all the spaces in between. Like, just stay in the room.
That was Stacey Herrera, producer and host of the Sensuality Project. Incredible woman supporting other women to really come home to and be present in and enjoy being in our human bodies. I love Stacey's podcast. You can probably check it out wherever you're listening to this podcast. It's called The Sensuality Project. It'll be linked in the show notes, of course. And hey, if you are interested in learning more about how to create your own podcast as a way to get more comfortable being in your own voice, head on over to podcastenvy.com and check out my brand new show. And if you are stuck in that self-consciousness trap, or you've been comparing yourself physically, personally, professionally, whateverly, to other people, or you've been getting down on yourself or struggling with that imposter voice, one of my favorite remedies for this is a meditation technique called Metta. And if you haven't already, you can actually get a free download of a guided audio meditation on Metta from me at thecreativeimposter.com/magic. Again, that's thecreativeimposter.com/magic. Ooh, one quick thing. Sarah Bueno, who I had on The Creative Imposter a few episodes ago, who you loved, has her own podcast. Huzzah! So excited for Sarah. Her podcast is called Conversations with a Wounded Healer. It just launched in March, and the Creative Imposter Studios, that's my audio engineer Edwin, Maddie, my editing apprentice, and I are doing the post-production and editing on Sarah's show, and we love it. Sometimes we love listening to it so much that we forget we're actually supposed to be working when we're editing it. You can find Conversations with a Wounded Healer wherever you're listening to this show and linked up in the show notes for this episode. This show is all about sharing the parallel journey of healers of all different kinds, walking alongside our clients and how we attend to our own humanity while caring for others. Sarah's mission is cultivating a space where we celebrate vulnerability, authenticity, and showing up. Congratulations, Sarah, on your launch. I know you're listening to this right now, and I'm super excited to see what else comes from your show. This episode was mixed, as always, by Edwin Ruiz. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening. Without you, there wouldn't really be a podcast anymore. So thank you. And this week, I am wishing you the awareness and the courage to be present right now in your own body. And as Stacy says it best, stay in the room.